Well, good morning, everybody. I wanted to start you off with a map here looking at the time period of July into early August at average temperature ranks by climate district. Because as you look at this map, despite the heat wave that came into the Midwest at the end of July, when you add it all up, we were cooler across a big section of the country here. Everywhere to the south of this line, okay, and over here to the west of this line has been exceptionally hot. I'm thinking about what we've seen along the Gulf Coast into Texas, the Southwest, and then up the West Coast, with the one exception here of this part of Idaho, where likely the effects of the mountains have kept this particular region a little bit cooler than average. But when you just step back and look at this, the one thing that July gave us that June and May did not is contrast, and contrast in the direction that would drive a stronger upper level wind. Now, what am I talking about? You make it hotter than normal south and cooler than normal north. That's a much stronger thermal gradient as you go to the north. And when you see that change in temperature so rapid as you go to the north, what it drives is what we call the thermal wind relationship. And that actually ends up driving the jet stream level winds across this area. So you want to look at the orientation of the temperature pattern to understand what the upper level winds are doing. And that's what I want to show you here. Now, this map, the color coding does not represent hot versus cold. What it represents is at the jet stream level, whether the winds were stronger from the west to the east or were they stronger from the north to the south or south to north, okay? So wherever you see the blue colors, that's where we had more of a meridional flow. So this indicates ridging. Wherever you see the warmer colors, this represents stronger, more zonal winds coming out of the west. And so because of that contrast of the heat south and the cooler conditions north throughout July, there was a much stronger wind across the country. Now, this is the wind that also supported the upper level wind shear required to make the strong thunderstorms, because not only was June extremely active for severe weather, but July was as well. Between the 2 months, I'll have to go back and add this up, but I think there's something on the order of 13,000 reports of severe weather across the United States. But you see the blue here? This is actually representative of that ridge that keeps developing in this area, keeping the heat in that region. Now, on the precipitation side of it, this is, again, the same time period, July through the beginning of August, looking at precipitation ranks by climate district. And I want to be clear about one thing on this graph, or map, excuse me. The resolution is low because we've resampled all of the data to the climate district level. So, for example, you may be sitting somewhere here in the Midwest. I'm thinking about maybe over by where my family's from, over here in Western Illinois. There are some extremely dry areas over here, but because of some big rainfall events that have happened inside this large climate reporting district, it offsets the statistic. See how that works? So when you look at this overall, understand that there's a region that starts here, goes all the way across Illinois into Iowa, South Dakota, Minnesota, stretches into the Canadian prairie that's been quite dry, that doesn't show up statistically very well on this. But you can see it come down to the lower Mississippi River Valley, into Texas, the Southwest, up the West Coast, extremely dry conditions through this, nearly 35-day time period that we're looking at here. Now, in the last week, we've been discussing the ridge that's been south and how the storms have really kind of flowed around this. And while we have yet to see the full development of a strong monsoonal flow, the atmosphere has kind of been outperforming itself throughout parts of Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado, especially in Colorado, where, again, last night we had more large thunderstorms producing hail. But just take a look at this corridor over the last week. Extremely wet conditions that have ripped through parts of Nebraska. We've had over a foot of rainfall in parts of Missouri and very heavy rainfall down here in southern Illinois. Then getting into the southeast all the way up to parts of the Carolinas, several locations, 4 to 6 inches of rainfall. Now, that's not to ignore what's been to the north of this or what came out of parts of Montana into North Dakota. But this has just been rolling around a larger ridge here that seems to be a very persistent feature in this pattern as we go forward. So let's stretch it out and look at this in a little different terms here. So the previous map was total accumulated precip. This one is now just looking at the percent of normal. So this goes back over a 2-week time period, and it's, again, to show you. See these drier areas and see how they stretch right in through this spot and get all the way up here into the Canadian prairie, which we've talked about quite a bit. But I want to take note of the contrast in Oklahoma and in Texas. We showed this yesterday, but it's just amazing to see how sharp the divide is here. And we are going to be looking at a forecast that's going to continue this pattern going forward. Extremely wet weather in between, dry conditions south and dry conditions to the north. I also want to point out we've watched drought redevelop here in parts of the West, specifically the Pacific Northwest, as we've gone forward into this summer time frame. And I'm going to put this into much broader context by showing you the latest drought monitor. So this was released yesterday. And again, what it just shows us here is currently we have a little over 50% of the land area in the lower 48 in some form of drought. But over that month, that last month time period, you can just come over to maps, go to change maps, right there. And what you can do is you can change this around. So this is how much the drought monitor's changed in a week. But I told you I wanted to look at it over a month. And this is what we've got. So there have been a lot of areas that have seen improvements, which would be represented by these colors. But look at the degradation in drought in Texas and throughout parts of the Midwest, in parts of Montana, and then down in the Southwest, and then the Pacific Northwest. These have been areas that we're going to have to keep a very close eye on as we progress forward. Now, one thing I did want to add here, I was thinking about the verification of this summer forecast. And if you remember, we talked a lot about 2009 way back in spring as possibly being an analog. The pattern has been similar in terms of temperatures, but not in terms of magnitude. This is what the same time period, again, the 1st of July through the beginning of August, looked like in terms of temperature ranks in 2009. So again, this is this year. Okay, you can see cooler, hot south, hot west. We did have that, but this is not a good analog. In fact, I can make an argument that there is no analog to 2023. In fact, we'll look at that again at the very end here. All right, I do want to also bring you up to speed on some new data that was released earlier this week. This comes from NASA. We're looking at NDVI values. And it's interesting to look at these values across the United States because of what they're showing. Now, I know that there are many, many areas throughout Missouri that are very stressed right now in terms of the extent of the drought plus the problems of the flooding, which means if you're going to use NDVI to estimate yield, it's going to fail you in this case because it actually says that the NDVI values in Missouri are above average. My home state of Illinois, take a look here. I know there's been major crop stress in Illinois, but the crop is green right now. So therefore, from space, it looks so much better than than the climatological averages. I'm just going to zip down to Texas, and I'll link this in the notes below so you can go play around with this and look at your individual states. But take a look at Texas. After all that rain came through in May and June, the NDVI values have just plummeted. They're now well below average. And if you keep zipping around, like look at Kansas. After 3 years of extreme drought, things are green, but the state of the crop may not be what we want it to be, even though it's the highest NDVI value in the last 20 years. And you can jump all over the country. If we go to the southeast and take a look at Georgia, or if you come up here to New York has a very skinny range, but you can see they're actually above average as well. So please come in and play around with this and take a look because I think the data are incredibly valuable. But remember, you have to keep them into the context of what this particular year has given. So again, I'll link that for you. Right now, though, just take a look at the sun rising here across the east. I'm going to go back to yesterday just to show you what was going on. Major storms coming in on this front right in through here. We can see this low that's taking shape over parts of Wyoming. That's going to be a key player, that low right there for the next 5 days as it just continues to form and roll across the country. First real low I've seen of all summer. You can see the big storms that pulled right here through parts of the southeast. And then take a look at the wildfire smoke that's in parts of British Columbia and throughout the Pacific Northwest. It's being a bit kind of obscured in the view by the cloud cover, but there is wildfires there. Now, these storms that blew up in Colorado yesterday were hailers. I just want to show you over the last 3 days the addition of hail reports here. So big storms in the north, a lot of hail coming out of Colorado into Nebraska, and then with the complexes of storms leading to the flooding in through here, we've seen some hail in that region as well. So this is where we arrive, okay? As we start to think about this forecast going forward, this animation is showing you the last 12 hours or so of precipitation. So even again through this morning, we have right in through this area the continuation of all of that flooding that's been going on. But here's the low that we're going to be talking about still when I pick up my next video on Monday, because this low by next Monday is only going to be over the Great Lakes. It's an extremely slow mover, and it's going to deliver a lot of precipitation. There's one great thing about this animation, and that is how far into North Dakota this rainfall made it so far. Now, if you remember earlier this week, I kept saying, gosh, each new run wants to suppress this moisture, not letting it get this far into North Dakota, which parts of North Dakota are in drought. So to see it really beginning to make its way there is kind of it's a blessing for this area just to get that moisture into place. So our all hazards weather map this morning at 5 a.m. We've got flood watches out here and here. and also in New England. A lot of dense fog advisories. This is all excessive heat watches and warnings. This has been just a mainstay in the forecast, and these are red flag warnings here from Oregon into parts of Montana. All right, I did want to show you, just because we've been talking about this, that we've continued our severe weather risk days, again, starting on June the 8th. We've had at least a slight risk every day, making it all the way now to Friday. And if you just have a look here at today's outlook, we're watching parts of New England and again, coming out of Colorado into Kansas and Nebraska for severe storms. Now, as the low takes shape, because this is where the front is going to be tonight, getting into tomorrow on Saturday, we've got a much more expansive region for severe weather. And as this slow-moving low just makes its way over toward the Great Lakes, this is where it'll be in the day on the 6th. So we're going to watch this region on the 6th. And then on the 7th, it'll still be here. I mean, this is a 4-day event just trying to get across the country here. That's more common of winter to see that kind of slow progression of a storm system. But the one we're watching is right here. So do you remember back at the beginning of this week, I talked about the coupled jet stream? Here's one piece of the jet from the subtropics. Here's the other piece of the jet from the polar regions. And right in the middle, this little inflection point right here is where the shortwave lives. That's getting support from both jets to give us upper level divergence. That means where air is spreading out aloft. And that's drawing in a low. It's creating a low pressure center. But the winds are relatively weak. They're not moving this thing out. So this is what you end up getting. Ready? So we start right here at 6 a.m. this morning, and we're just going to watch the storms continue to roll. I mean, this has just been a mainstay of the pattern this whole week. Continue to roll here, but watch the low pressure system appear. It curls up into Montana. Through Friday into Saturday, has it really moved? Not too much. This is getting through the afternoon on Saturday. And all the way by Sunday, it's basically moved from Wyoming to Sioux Falls. Like, that's it. So again, watch this again. This is this morning through the weekend. Now, did you notice what was happening on the southern side of this? More severe storms coming through again here on Saturday. Heavy rain. Then again on Sunday. And this is the area that we've been watching getting flooded out here over the last week or so. So you put it all together, and the latest from the WPC paints this map for total accumulated precipitation over the next 7 days. Now you start to see where these rains could fill in that gap we talked about right in through here, but it does not extend to the Canadian prairie. You notice again, see how sharp the divide is in parts of Oklahoma? We see that south of that line into Texas, extremely dry. We do see that the forecast is slowing down the progression of these monsoonal storms as we work our way into this next 7-day time period, which gets us out there, to the 11th. But in New England, wet conditions along the Appalachian Mountains, a bit drier. This is the forecast map that I think is going to be most close to accurate as we go forward. I would like to show you the progression of that low. Let's keep an eye on it here from the ECMWF. So playing this forward, this is getting through Saturday, now into Sunday afternoon and evening. So again, look at it moving right through parts of the Midwest. Getting into Monday. So by Monday, next time we talk, it'll only be here over the eastern Great Lakes. And it tries to exit and loop itself up into a deeper trough that's over the Hudson Bay. Now, following that, keep an eye right into this area. We're going to see another storm system pull through, delivering a lot of rain by midweek next week back into the midsection of the country. And I'm just focusing on that given the dryness that was in parts of this area lately, but also earlier in the year. And then where does that go? It curls back up. It curls back up into these lows. And every time they just drag a front all the way into the south and east. So you stitch it all together and you get this outlook. These are the chances over the next 10 days of getting at least an inch of precipitation. We step it up to see where the heaviest rains are. This is the probability of 2 inches. Look how wet these regions are going to be here. And then we go up to 4 inches. And again, we've identified a few areas that still have the potential for getting a lot of heavy rainfall. The drier side of it is the same narrative all week. Parts of the Appalachian Mountains, south of this line in Oklahoma, getting west into the U.S., and here in the Canadian prairie. By day 10, this is the thing you got to watch. That's the deeper trough that's over the Aleutian Islands. It's been supported by the large ridging out ahead of it that gets into the Arctic. So the flow will always do this in this setup. Notice who's returned to play. There's the subtropical high pressure system called the Bermuda High that's been back. And finally, now that it's in its place here, we could start to really have to watch this for its transport of moisture and potentially tropical systems over the coming weeks and months. But this particular pattern all the way out there by mid-August does this in terms of precipitation. You see the CPC, European model and the GFS all paint that same corridor with wetter conditions. And it does likely extend into the southeast, as the CPC and European models suggest. Do we get a weaker monsoon out of this? That's likely going to be the case going into the middle of August. On the temperature side of it, the heat is going to stay south. The heat is going to build west. And I want to show you the evolution of this pattern here. So today's high temperatures are shown here. Look at another just day of triple-digit heat to the south. The warmth that's here throughout the Midwest has got a pretty short lifespan on it. This is now Saturday getting into Sunday. You can see behind that front the cooler air that's coming in. How far to the south does it make it? Maybe to the Red River, but south of that we still stay in triple digits. Going into, this is Monday, into Tuesday and Wednesday of next week, the cooler conditions across the northern tier of the United States stay on, but you can find the ridge pretty easily down here in the south where these temperatures are still staying routinely above 100 degrees. And this is what next Thursday pans out to look like. Now, after next Thursday, we're going to watch a bigger ridge event likely take shape in the west. And what that's going to do is this to the temperature. So here's the next 5 days. This is day 5 through 10. Now watch the western United States. This is day 10 through 15. We're looking at a pretty significant heat wave that is, I think, quite more likely to form across the western United States into mid-August. And if it does that, I would expect to see a major increase in the risk of wildfires, especially in the Pacific Northwest and British Columbia as this pattern evolves. All right. Now, the long range, I have no evidence to overturn persistence in this pattern. So what you see, I think, is what we're going to get at least through the third week of August, possibly even beyond that. And that's got a lot of people thinking about, well, is this colder air going to stick around for the remainder of the season? I'll bring that up again in just a few moments. But before I do that, I do want to say that if something could overturn the pattern, it will likely come out of the tropics, either the Pacific or the Atlantic, something to disrupt it. But right now, the next 7 days in the Atlantic is pretty calm. And the newest update from the European model over the next 10 days has really kind of reduced the chances of anything developing here. Although you will see some kind of fantasy model runs here producing some pretty large hurricanes. The ensembles have not bit into that. But I will make a point here that the tropical Atlantic is still, when you look at the ocean temperatures, substantially warmer than the climatological normals, warmer than it typically is even in the peak of hurricane season. And in the Atlantic, the shear values are low, which means the Atlantic is spring-loaded and ready to make tropical systems. As soon as we get a good cluster of storms going, we're going to have to watch it very carefully because of the conditions being so ripe. I do want to remind you something about where we are in the hurricane season. You are here, okay? So all of this is still yet to come over the next 45 days. Climatologically, the peak of the hurricane season is right around mid-September. And so we are just at the beginning of it. So if you're curious, like, well, why are all these tropical systems? Well, we're not there climatologically yet. So we're going to watch this all very carefully. All right. Later today, please visit the CPC's website. You just go to CPC or Google CPC and you'll find it. They're going to update their week 3, week 4 forecast. My anticipation of that update is that it's going to look very similar to this. We'll see. I'll report to you on Monday. And the last couple things I want to talk to you about is what could possibly be setting up for this fall. You know, we've been talking all week about El Nino and how it's present but not engaged in the pattern. Well, beginning in late July, we did see the Southern Oscillation Index drop off, and it is almost down here to that criteria of -7 to say that the trade winds are fully behaving like El Nino. If this should continue from now through fall, I just want to put up kind of an idea out there about what to expect, because over the weekend, we're going to get new model updates from the European looking out in the longer range. So just something to think about. If we look at those years where El Nino developed, I got them all listed right here, at what happened in September and October with precipitation, you end up getting something like this. It was wetter. Harvest was wetter in this area. It was wetter down south. And when you look at the composite, we were drier in the Pacific Northwest and drier along the East Coast. So this year, the composite years when El Nino was developing. We can then do the same thing, but flip this over to temperatures. I know you've heard a lot of discussion, probably from other folks, about the risk of an early frost. We cannot accurately say something like that is going to happen. But what we can say is that those developing El Nino years in September and October did have a cooler bias across much of North America. Now, it doesn't mean that this year is going to look like this. It's just suggesting that the development of the El Nino in fall could lead toward cooler conditions in fall. That's all that we want to say about this. The other side of it is just to look at the historical correlations. So if we look at September, October, and even include November into this, this is what typically happens with precipitation. Again, you can kind of see these wetter corridors with the drier conditions being in the Pacific Northwest. So it's just got me thinking about what the risks might be for a lot of fall harvest activity, going forward here as we look at this El Nino and its continued development. Because just take a look at these ocean temperatures. Current. We have got some very warm water continuing to surface here. The negative phase of the Pacific Meridional mode is fading, and look at how warm the North Pacific and the North Atlantic are compared to their climatological averages. So this is what tends to be driving the pattern right now, and I want you to watch this area carefully. You see that cool water there has been there because of a recent typhoon activity causing some upwelling. Should we get a tropical system here to get up over these warm waters and maintain its strength, it could end up over the Aleutian Islands, dipping troughs into this area, which means the flow ends up doing a whole lot more of this. And I'm just going to make a point here. Whenever we have a big tropical system get into the Aleutian Islands, and it is late September and October, we end up developing a deep trough there and a deep trough here. And that is what could be supportive of some sort of early frost risk. But that's it. And no one can forecast that this far out. It's just saying that the conditions are there. So let's watch out for it. Hey, I really appreciate all the extra time you gave me this week. We had a lot to talk about. And I hope you all have a great weekend, a safe weekend, and I'll talk to you again on Monday. Thank you.